My name is Alex. I'm 24, and until about 6 months ago, I would have told you I had a pretty good handle on things. Not perfect, nobody's life is, but stable. I graduated college with a degree I actually cared about, history, ancient civilizations mostly, and landed a decent job in a small museum upstate. It wasn't the Smithsonian, but it was honest work. And I got to spend my days around artifacts that had seen centuries, sometimes millennia, of human existence. There's a quiet thrill in that, a connection to something vast and unknowable. I lived in a decent, if slightly worn apartment on the edge of town, big enough for me and my overflowing bookshelves. My routine was solid. Wake up, coffee, work, the gym, maybe a dive into an obscure text, bed. Repeat. It was simple, predictable, and frankly, I liked it that way. I wasn't looking for excitement, not really. Life had given me enough curveballs in my younger years, enough sudden shifts and unexpected turns, that I'd learned to appreciate the steady hum of the everyday. My parents were good people, still are, but their lives were a bit chaotic. An ever-shifting landscape of new ventures, new towns, new ideas. I loved them, but I craved roots. This town, this job, this apartment, they were my roots. The change, when it came, wasn't a sudden dramatic event. It was more like a slow, insidious seep, like dampness working its way into old plaster. It started with sleep. I've always been a sound sleeper, the kind of person who could drop off anywhere, anytime. But then the dreams began. Not nightmares, not at first. Just vividness. Dreams of old places, ancient forests, crumbling stone, places I'd never seen but felt disturbingly familiar. Sometimes there were figures, indistinct, just out of reach, whispering in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow recognized on a primal level. I'd wake up feeling drained, as if I'd run a marathon in my sleep, the images lingering, clinging to the edges of my waking thoughts. I tried to shake it off, chalk it up to stress or too much late-night reading. My brain, I reasoned, was probably just trying to process all the historical data I was feeding it daily. But the feeling of exhaustion deepened, the edges of my days blurring into a continuous fatigue. Then came the sounds. Low, almost imperceptible at first, a faint scratching behind the walls, like mice, but deeper, heavier. My apartment building was old, built in the 1920s, full of its own quirks and creaks. I ignored it. Old buildings make noises, pipes settling, wind whistling through eaves, floorboards shifting. That's what I told myself. But the scratching became more distinct, and it wasn't always behind the walls. Sometimes it was above me, sometimes below, sometimes, unsettlingly, right next to my bed, on the floorboards, almost rhythmic. It was usually at night, in the deepest hours, when the town outside was hushed and the only other sound was the distant hum of the refrigerator. I started sleep. The museum, usually a place of quiet contemplation, started to feel different too. I'd be in the archives, surrounded by ancient pottery shards and brittle manuscripts, and the air would grow cold, sharply so, even on a warm afternoon. A distinct, earthy smell would sometimes waft through the air, like damp soil and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. I'd look around, but no one else seemed to notice. My colleague, Brenda, who usually had an opinion on everything, would just hum distractedly as she cataloged artifacts, oblivious. I started questioning my senses. Was I imagining it? Was the lack of sleep finally breaking me down? I'd rub my temples, trying to clear the haze from my mind, but the chill, the smell, they persisted. They were subtle, almost fleeting, but enough to make the hairs on my arms stand on end. One evening, I was closing up, the last person left in the vast, echoing silence of the museum. I was checking the alarms, walking through the exhibits, the hushed reverence of the place amplified by the solitude. I passed the Egyptian exhibit, usually my favorite. It housed a few sarcophagi, some scrolls, and a particularly haunting collection of funerary masks. As I walked past the display case containing a small, remarkably preserved canopic jar, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. It wasn't the wind, wasn't a creaking building. It was distinct, intimate, as if someone was breathing right next to my ear. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just the still, silent exhibits, bathed in the low glow of the security lights. My heart hammered. I told myself it was my imagination, an echo, a trick of the mind. But the air around the canopic jar was suddenly frigid, and the metallic, earthy scent was potent, overwhelming. I didn't linger. I finished my rounds in a blur, locked up, and practically ran to my car, the whispers seeming to follow me, just out of reach all the way home. I knew then, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't just stress or lack of sleep anymore. Something was happening, and it was happening to me. The night after the museum incident, sleep was a battle. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old building amplified into something sinister. I finally drifted off, but the dreams were worse. Not just vivid now, but suffocating. I was in a place I somehow knew, a labyrinth of dark, damp tunnels, the air heavy with that same earthy, metallic scent. And there were whispers, not just indistinct murmurs anymore, but a chorus, a multitude of voices, ancient and resonant, speaking in that unidentifiable tongue. I couldn't make out words, but the feeling behind them was palpable, a deep, aching sorrow, and something else, something sharp and cold, like hunger. I woke up gasping, tangled in my sheets, the sounds of the dream still echoing in my ears, my apartment suddenly feeling smaller, colder, no longer a sanctuary. I tried to regain a semblance of normalcy. I went to work, forcing myself to focus on cataloging a new shipment of Roman coins, but my mind kept drifting. Every time a colleague walked by, I found myself tensing, expecting them to notice the change in me, the raw fear simmering just beneath my skin. But they didn't. They were just Brenda, talking about her cat, and Mr. Henderson, meticulously dusting the Mesoamerican pottery. I felt isolated, trapped in my own spiraling nightmare, unable to share it, unwilling to sound completely unhinged. Who would believe me? That my apartment was making strange noises, that ancient artifacts were whispering to me, that I was having dreams of dark tunnels and hungry voices? I'd sound like I belonged in a padded room. That evening, I decided to take action. Logical action. I was going to prove to myself that I was just tired, stressed, and imagining things. I bought a set of motion-activated cameras, the kind people use to catch porch pirates. I strategically placed them around my apartment, one in the living room, one in the hallway leading to my bedroom, and one aimed at the wall where I often heard the dragging sounds. If it was mice, I'd see them. If it was something else, well, at least I'd have proof. Or more likely, I'd have footage of an empty room, and I could finally tell myself to get a grip. I also bought a dozen air fresheners, dousing my apartment in artificial citrus and pine to combat the phantom earthy smell. It was a pathetic attempt, I knew, but it made me feel like I was doing something. The first few nights, The cameras showed nothing, just the still, silent rooms. I watched the playback, hour after hour, looking for even a flicker of movement, a stray shadow. Nothing. I felt a surge of relief, almost giddy. See? I was just stressed. I was tired. This was all in my head. The scratching and dragging sounds became less frequent too. Or maybe I was just tuning them out, more confident in their non-existence. I started sleeping a little better, the dreams receding to a dull throb in the background rather than a full-on assault. But then, it started again, and this time, it wasn't just sounds. I woke up one night, not from a dream, but from a tangible chill in the air. My room was suddenly freezing, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, not just chills your skin. My breath plumed in front of me. I slowly sat up, my eyes darting around the pitch-black room. The fan was off, no white noise to comfort me. And then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible scrape directly below my bed. My blood ran cold. I lay there, rigid, listening, my ears straining in the oppressive silence. The scrape came again, a little louder this time, followed by a faint thump, like something heavy shifting. It sounded like it was coming from inside the floorboards. Impossible. I reached for my phone, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I fumbled for the flashlight app, and its beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty space under my bed. Nothing. Just dust bunnies and the underside of my mattress frame. I slid out of bed, my feet hitting the shockingly cold floor. I shone the light around the room, into the corners, under the dresser. Still nothing. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. As I stood there, the distinct, sickeningly familiar, earthy, metallic smell hit me. It was stronger than ever, thick in the air, making my stomach churn. And then I saw it. On the pristine, polished hardwood floor, near the wall that separated my bedroom from the living room, was a faint, almost invisible smear. It was dark, a deep reddish brown, and when I knelt down, my hand shaking as I touched it, it felt slightly viscous. It was the smell that confirmed my worst fear. It smelled exactly like the raw earth and old blood I'd sometimes caught whiffs of at the museum. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't stress. This was real. And it was in my apartment. I ran to my computer, fumbling to pull up the camera footage. My fingers trembled as I clicked through the timeline. I started from just before I woke up. The living room camera showed nothing for hours, just the static image of my couch and coffee table. Then, at around 3:17 a.m., a slight disturbance, a faint shimmer, like heat rising from the floor. But then it was gone. I rewound it, played it again, frame by frame. There it was, barely discernible, a faint ripple in the air, right where the smear was now. And then, as I watched, something else. The camera, which was fixed and unmoving, seemed to shift slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if nudged by an unseen force, just for a fraction of a second. Then it settled back. I clicked to the hallway camera. My breath hitched. At 3:18 a.m., a dark shape, fleeting and indistinct, seemed to pass in front of the lens. It was too fast, too blurry to make out details. But it was there. A shadow that didn't belong, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace. It moved from the direction of my bedroom towards the living room, then vanished. The last camera, the one aimed at the wall, showed nothing but an empty wall. But the timestamp on that camera showed that it had stopped recording at 3:19 a.m. It hadn't just stopped. The camera's battery was full, the memory card empty. It was as if it had been wiped, or something had actively disabled it. I sat there, staring at the screens, the cold sweat prickling my skin. My logical brain, the one that dealt with ancient history and cataloged artifacts, was completely overwhelmed. This wasn't a mouse. This wasn't a draft. This wasn't me. Something was in my apartment. Something I couldn't see but could hear, could smell, and now, it seemed, could even interact with my physical environment. The smear on the floor, the shifted camera, the wiped footage. It was all undeniable. I was no longer just experiencing strange phenomena. I was being actively affected, and I had no idea what it was or what it wanted. The sheer, chilling anonymity of it was worse than any monster I could have imagined. The next morning was a blur of adrenaline and disbelief. I scrubbed at the reddish-brown smear on the floor with bleach, then with hot water and soap until my hands were raw. It didn't truly disappear, just faded into a faint, almost invisible discoloration on the wood. A ghost of a stain that only I could see. The smell, however, lingered, clinging to the air like a damp shroud despite my frantic cleaning and the overwhelming scent of citrus air fresheners. I knew it wasn't just in my head anymore. The physical evidence, however subtle, was there. I went to work, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every gust of wind outside sounded like a whisper. My colleagues, bless their oblivious hearts, went about their day, discussing new acquisitions and upcoming exhibits. I tried to engage, to pretend I was normal, but my responses were stilted, my gaze distant. Brenda asked if I was feeling unwell. I mumbled something about a bad night's sleep. It was a lie, but not really. It had been the worst night of my life. That afternoon, while researching a rather dull collection of Roman household tools, I found myself instinctively veering off course. Instead of pottery and bronze, my searches turned to folklore, to urban legends, to anything that might offer a rational or even irrational explanation for what was happening. I typed in variations of haunted apartment, unseen entity, ancient whispers. Most of it was sensationalized nonsense, but a few obscure forums mentioned phenomena that felt eerily similar. Cold spots, strange smells, the feeling of being watched, and most unsettlingly, objects being moved or cameras malfunctioning. There was even a passing reference to earthbound spirits that fed on ambient energy, leaving behind a chilling residue. It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie, but a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The chilling residue part hit too close to home. When I got back to my apartment that evening, a gnawing anxiety had taken root deep within me. The silence felt different now, heavy, expectant. I checked the cameras immediately. Nothing had moved. Nothing seemed disturbed. I spent hours rewatching the footage from the night before, poring over every pixel. The faint ripple in the air, the subtle camera shift, the dark, blurry shape in the hallway. They were all still there, undeniable, even if my rational mind screamed for an explanation. I zoomed in, paused, tried to enhance the blurry image, but it remained stubbornly indistinct, just a fleeting disturbance in the frame. I ate a quick, tasteless dinner, my appetite gone. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and orange, a profound sense of isolation washed over me. I was alone in this. My parents, practical to a fault, would tell me to see a doctor. My friends, well, I didn't even know how to begin to explain this to them. They'd laugh, or worse, they'd look at me with pity. I I decided to try an experiment. I placed a small, portable audio recorder on my nightstand. If something was whispering, if something was scratching, I wanted to capture it. I also lit every lamp in my apartment, bathing the rooms in a harsh, artificial light, as if brightness could scare away whatever lurked in the shadows. It felt like a desperate, childish act, but it was all I had. I pulled my mattress onto the floor, directly in the middle of the living room, facing the wall that had the camera still active. I wanted to be able to see if anything happened. I wrapped myself in a heavy blanket, a flimsy shield against an unseen enemy, and lay down, my eyes fixed on the camera screen on my laptop, the small red light of the audio recorder blinking steadily beside me. Hours crawled by. The apartment was still, oppressively so. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the frantic beat of my own heart. I started to relax, just a fraction. Maybe it wouldn't come back tonight. Maybe it was a one-time occurrence, a peculiar anomaly. Just as that thought formed, the temperature in the room plummeted. The sudden cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. My teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. Then came the sound. Not a scratch, not a drag, but something softer, more intimate. A faint, almost imperceptible rasping sound, like dry leaves skittering across a tombstone. It was coming from the hallway, just out of the camera's view. My eyes darted to the laptop screen, but the living room cameras showed nothing. The red light on the audio recorder continued to blink. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. The rasping sound grew louder, closer, moving into the hallway just beyond the frame. And then, a shadow fell across the far end of the living room, a deeper darkness within the already dim light. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to flicker at the edges, like heat rising from asphalt. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, gliding rather than walking, its form so indistinct it seemed to absorb the light around it. My mouth was dry, my throat constricted. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. The shadow paused in the archway, leading into the living room. It was looking at me. I couldn't see eyes, or a face, or any discernible features, but I felt its gaze, a cold, penetrating focus that burrowed deep into my very soul. The earthy metallic smell intensified, making me gag. The rasping sound was now constant, like something struggling for air, or perhaps breathing with an effort that defied comprehension. It took a single, slow, horrifying step into the living room. The air around it seemed to shimmer, distorting the familiar furniture behind it. It raised an arm, or what I perceived to be an arm, long and skeletal, not ending in a hand, but in something wispy, like tendrils of smoke. It stretched towards me, slowly, inexorably. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my face in the blanket, whimpering. My logical brain was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a dream. It was real. And it was here, in my apartment, reaching for me. The cold intensified, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The rasping sound filled my ears, no longer just a sound, but a vibration that seemed to course through my very bones. I felt a pressure on my blanket, a weight, and then a touch. Not a solid touch, but something ephemeral, like a spider's web brushing my cheek, but cold. So terribly cold. I gasped, opening my eyes. The shadow was directly over me, towering, its form flickering, its tendril-like arm hovering inches from my face. And then, for a split second, I saw it. Not a face, not eyes, but a swirling void within the form. And from that void, a faint, fleeting glimpse of something ancient and broken, something that spoke of immense pain and an unquenchable thirst. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The cold receded, the rasping sound faded, and the shadow vanished into thin air. I lay there, trembling uncontrollably, hyperventilating, tears streaming down my face. The room was still lit, but the previous sense of artificial safety was shattered. I could still feel the phantom touch on my cheek, the lingering cold, the metallic scent burning in my nostrils. I pushed myself up, scrambling away from where the shadow had been, until my back hit the wall. My gaze fell on the audio recorder. The red light was still blinking. It had been recording the entire time. With shaking fingers, I picked it up, my heart thumping against my ribs like a drum. What had it captured? What horrors were now preserved on this small device? I wanted to smash it, to destroy any evidence, any link to what I had just experienced. But a terrifying curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know. I had to hear it. My hands trembled so violently, I almost dropped the audio recorder. My apartment, once a haven of quiet comfort, now felt like the antechamber to something unspeakable. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. Every breath of air felt heavy with the lingering chill of its touch. The scent of damp earth and old blood was still faint, but unmistakably there, a phantom perfume of dread. My eyes darted to the place where it had been, that flickering, indistinct form that had reached for me. My mind replayed the image, the swirling void, the glimpse of something ancient and broken. It had been real, utterly, terrifyingly real. I had to hear the recording. A primal part of me screamed to throw the device across the room, to smash it, to erase the very possibility that this horror existed. But a stronger, more desperate urge took over. I needed proof, not just for myself, but for the sanity I felt rapidly slipping away. If I heard it, then I wasn't crazy. If it was real, then maybe, just maybe, I could fight it, or at least understand it. With painstaking care, I plugged the recorder into my laptop and put on my headphones, my hands shaking so badly I almost fumbled the jack. The initial playback was just the hum of my air conditioning, my own ragged breathing, the distant sounds of the city. Then, the distinct, sickening drop in temperature. I could hear my sharp intake of breath, a small, choked sound. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. And then it began. The rasping. It wasn't just a sound, not anymore. Through the headphones, it was amplified, intimate, an agonizing friction that seemed to scrape against my very eardrums. It sounded like something dying, or something trying desperately to breathe, its throat raw, its lungs failing. It grew louder, closer, moving within the recorded soundscape. I could hear the faint thump as the shadow, or whatever it was, took its first step into the living room. My recorded breathing became more panicked, more ragged. I could hear the rustle of my blanket as I buried my face, the small, whimpering sounds I hadn't even realized I'd made. And then, terrifyingly, undeniably, a new sound cut through the rasping. A low, guttural click, like bone against bone, or dry wood snapping. And then, a whisper. It was faint, barely audible beneath the rasping, but it was there. Not in English, not in any language I recognized. It was the same primal, ancient tongue from my dreams. But this time, a single word seemed to detach itself from the cacophony of whispers. A name. My name. Alex ... It was spoken with a breathy, dragging resonance, elongated, as if it took immense effort to produce. It was distorted, ancient, yet undeniably my name, spoken by something that had no right to know it. My blood ran cold, colder than it had been when the entity was standing over me. It knew me. It didn't just wander into my apartment. It was here for me. The recording ended shortly after that. The audio cut off with a sudden, sharp pop, as if the device itself couldn't bear to hold the sound any longer. I tore off the headphones, my hands flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. It knew my name. It had been whispering my name. This wasn't some random haunting, some residual energy clinging to an old building. This was personal. I paced my apartment, a frantic caged animal. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to pack a bag and drive until my car ran out of gas. But where would I go? It had found me here. What if it could follow? What if this wasn't about the apartment at all, but about me? Had I disturbed something at the museum? Had I brought something back with me? My gaze fell on my bookshelves, on the volumes of ancient history, the texts on forgotten rituals and lost civilizations. My job, my passion, the very thing that had brought a sense of stability to my life, now felt like a terrifying trap. I thought of the canopic jar, the chill, the smell, the whisper. Was it connected? Was it something I had unknowingly awakened? The following days blurred into a waking nightmare. I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy at work, but my colleagues must have noticed. I was pale, jumpy, my eyes constantly darted into the shadows. Brenda asked if I was getting enough sleep. I just nodded, muttering about deadlines. I spent every night in my living room, lights blazing, the audio recorder ready, my eyes fixed on the empty space where the shadow had been. It didn't reappear in the same tangible form, but the cold spots returned, the earthy scent grew stronger, and the whispers, softer now, were constant, always at the edge of my hearing, weaving through the hum of the air conditioning. Always that distorted Alex. I couldn't sleep. My dreams were a terrifying echo of my waking hours. Tunnels, whispers, and a suffocating sense of presence. I researched feverishly, desperately, looking for anything, any obscure text, any ancient warning that matched my experience. I found fragmented accounts, unsettling parallels in folklore from across the globe. Entities that fed on fear, spirits that clung to the living, not to harm them physically, but to drain them, to consume their essence, to leave them hollow. Some even spoke of a calling, a resonance between certain individuals and these entities, a connection that drew them together. Was that what this was? Was I somehow called? One particularly chilling passage from an old, forgotten text spoke of shadow eaters, beings that resided in the spaces between realities, drawn to those whose own internal light was dimming, to those consumed by fear or sorrow. They didn't kill, not in the traditional sense. They absorbed. They took. They left behind only an empty shell. The description of their presence, their cold, their smell, it all fit. It sent a shiver of true existential dread down my spine. It wasn't just my life it wanted. It was me. My apartment became a tomb. I rarely left, only for work, where I moved like a ghost. I stopped answering calls from my parents, unable to explain, unwilling to worry them. I lived on coffee and a perpetual state of hyper-awareness. The whispers grew louder, clearer. Sometimes I thought I could almost make out words, fragmented commands, promises of oblivion. The cold was constant now, an oppressive weight that never lifted. I felt it seeping into my bones, into my very soul. I was wasting away, losing weight, my skin a sickly pallor, my eyes sunken and bloodshot. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight bled from the sky, painting the windows in hues of bruised purple, I heard it again, distinct and undeniable. Not a whisper this time, but a low, guttural murmur from the darkest corner of my living room. The corner the cameras could never quite capture fully. Come with us. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation. An invitation to dissolution, to emptiness. The cold intensified, radiating from that corner, drawing me in. My limbs felt heavy, my mind clouded, a strange sense of resignation washing over me. Part of me, the part that was utterly exhausted and terrified, almost wanted to give in, to let it take me, to let the suffering end. I stumbled towards the sound, drawn by an invisible, irresistible force. My vision blurred at the edges. The rasping sound filled my ears, becoming a chorus, surrounding me, pulling me deeper into the cold embrace. I was almost there, almost at the darkest corner, the source of the whispers, the core of the ancient cold. My hand reached out, drawn towards the impenetrable darkness, towards the promise of oblivion. And then, just as my fingers brushed against the biting cold of the empty air, something sparked within me, a flicker of anger, a stubborn, desperate refusal. This was my life. This was my apartment. I had built this stability, fought for it, cherished it. I would not surrender it, not to a shadow, not to a whisper, not to a cold hunger from beyond the veil. With a primal scream that tore my throat, I pulled back, stumbling away from the corner, my chest heaving. The whispers intensified, a furious chorus, the cold growing unbearable, teeth chattering. But I had resisted. I had said no. I ran. Not out of the apartment, not yet. I ran to my history books, tearing them from the shelves, flipping through pages, desperate. There had to be something. A counter-ritual. A protection. Something to sever this terrifying connection. My eyes scanned the Latin phrases, the obscure symbols, the ancient warnings. I had spent my life studying the past, and now the past had come for me. My gaze snagged on a single, short sentence in a faded text, a footnote almost, describing a minor folk tradition. Not a banishment, but a severing. A way to break the resonance. It spoke of a symbolic act, a severing of ties through an offering, not of blood, but of a deeply personal sacrifice, made at the exact point of contact, the very point where the connection had been forged. My eyes darted to the camera footage from that first night, the subtle ripple, the faint smear on the floor. My heart hammered with a desperate hope. This might be it. This might be the only way. I had to try. I had to sever the tie before it took everything. The whispers in my apartment grew louder, mocking, furious. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blood. It was still here, waiting, watching. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that the fight was far from over. I had only just begun to resist. And the night was long,